Hey everyone, welcome to the Blitz Esports tier list. Today we're taking a look at patch 8.16, which brings a lot of nerfs to burst champions and some big rune and keystone changes. Let's go over all the big updates, plus some counters to this meta's big threats. For a full stat breakdown of each champion's pick ban and win rates, you can check out the Blitz desktop app here, also linked in the description. We're always updating it with the latest stats and builds, plus easy to read guides on each champion's power spikes, weaknesses, and how to counter them in lane. Let's start off with New Akali. Now that we have enough data, we're ready to add her to the tier list at the B level, for now. Don't get us wrong, Akali can be really good, but her kit is incredibly hard to use and you'll need a lot of practice to master her. Her early game is also pretty weak, especially in mid where you'll get completely destroyed by competent mage players. Given that her kit is so hard to master, we don't recommend that you pick her up for climbing until you have a good grasp of how to play her in lane and know her damage combos well. Now to focus on the top lane, where we have two new additions to God tier, Garen and Yorick. They've both been doing well for a few patches, and some of their competition is getting nerfed. Garen is an incredibly easy champ to pick up, and in lower tiers, can really take over games if he gets ahead. His only real issue is that he can be kited around, but that can be minimized with good brush play, wave manipulation, or even mobility keystones like Predator and Phase Rush. The popular Trinity Force build gives him a serious damage spike at one item, and he's versatile enough to build more offensive or defensive on a game-to-game basis. If you want to counter Garen and have great positioning, try ranged options like Teemo, QUINN, and Kayle. Yorick has also been doing well against him since he can trade with grasp procs and trap Garen in gank scenarios with his walls. Speaking of Yorick, he's also doing great. He builds tanky after Trinity Force and becomes an unstoppable split pusher. Unlike Garen, he has W and ghouls that allow him to trade with ranged enemies with ease. Yorick's main issues are that he needs to fight on his own terms. Without his ghouls set up, it's pretty easy to trade against and kill him. If you're facing off against Yorick, Kled and Renekton are good answers. Both are able to dodge his E, move out of his W range, and then trade favorable when the moment is right. Tryndamere's moving down the list this patch because he's been in a rough spot for a while. After Infinity Edge lost amplified crits and Essence Reaver lost CDR, Tryndamere just didn't have enough power or cooldown on his E to succeed. To make up for the loss, Riot buffed his E cooldown to give him more mobility. Then, people started using AP builds to take advantage of his ratios and get even more CDR for his E. And now in this patch, Tryndamere's E cooldown is getting nerfed, and so the AP build is worse and the AD build is just as bad as before. The jungle was a big focal point of this patch, with Taliyah and Trundle going down, while some lower playrate junglers got buffed. Taliyah has been a god tier jungler for a while thanks to her fast clears, good mobility, and extremely high damage ganks. 8.16 is increasing the cooldown on her W in earlier ranks, and because she maxes this last, it should limit her skirmishing and move her down a tier. Trundle is also getting a hit this patch. His main damage ability got nerfed hard in both base damage and the duration of stolen AD. The AD ratio is going up, but Trundle isn't a champion that usually stacks a lot of attack damage, especially not in the jungle. Because of this, we're moving him down to the B tier. On the other hand, we're moving up the junglers that were buffed this patch, Rammus, Amumu, and Hecarim. They were already performing decently enough for the last couple of patches, and these buffs emphasize some of their strengths as champions. Now for the mid lane, where the Rune nerfs are really going to make an impact. Zoe has been an extremely obnoxious pick for several patches, and unfortunately, she's still going to be one. Riot nerfed her W since she shouldn't be doing so much damage outside her main spells, Q and E. This nerf will hit more inexperienced Zoe players the hardest, but for the Zoe mains that can hit their skill shots, this won't be a huge problem. What will have a big impact on all Zoe players is the nerf to her runes. Electrocute, Airy, Sudden Impact, and Scorch are all common choices on her, and they all got nerfed this patch. Matchup-wise, Zoe's problems are the same as ever. She struggles against mobile champions that can dodge her bubble and abuse her limited mobility. Fizz, Zed, and LeBlanc are all good counter picks. At the pro level, Aurelia and Yasuo are also used. Wukong was also targeted this patch, since he was sitting at the top of the win rate charts in 3 different positions. His Q is losing a lot of damage, and with Electrocute and Sudden Impact nerf, he won't be able to kill squishier targets with one burst rotations as easily. This nerf will be felt most in solo lanes, especially in mid, where he can have trouble against ranged mages in the early game. In the jungle, consider trying out Dark Harvest as an alternative. With the nerfs to assassins and burst damage, we're moving up Anivia, Malzahar, and Zilean to God tier. They have been solid A tier champions for several patches, and now that we have good metrics on them, we predict that with some burst leaving the mid lane, they will be able to thrive. And now onto the bot lane, where there's been just a few minor changes. QUINN is every top laner's worst nightmare, but recently, she's been seeing play in the bot lane, even in the professional scene. 8.16 brings nerfs to her AD scaling, but it's honestly not a huge change. At level 6, she's losing 3 AD. By level 11, it's a 5 AD loss. It's only at the later stages that the nerf is noticeable, where she'll have 10 less AD than she did on 8.15 by level 18. This isn't exactly a big issue since QUINN is picked for her early to mid game dominance. That said, she is yet another champion being hit by the nerfs to Electrocute and Sudden Impact. While these definitely affect her ability to assassinate targets in the mid game, she can still use Electrocute's shorter cooldown to chunk targets during the laning phase. She also has some unexplored keystone alternatives. Press the attack might be decent in bot lane if you can extend trades without being punished. Alternatively, she might pull a misfortune and start running Dark Harvest for burst instead. Kai'Sa is moving up from B to A tier thanks to a recent build change. A few patches ago, Kai'Sa was massively hit by nerfs and changes to Ginsu's Rageblade. Recently though, players are picking up Stormrazor as her first item before itemizing into Rageblade, giving her a stronger power spike in the early game. The recent changes to Stormrazor made the item cheaper, so Kai'Sa can hit her 2-item point earlier, which is a huge buff for her. On top of that, Stormrazor plus Rageblade will upgrade her Q, and with level 11 and Berserker's Greaves, she can upgrade her E. Kai'Sa is still very counterable though, especially by lane dominant picks like Misfortune, QUINN, or Draven. Finally, in the support role, we have changes to Leona and TAHM KENCH. Leona's getting a cooldown buff on her W, which is pretty major since she maxes it first. She's going to have access to resistances on a shorter cooldown, which means more opportunities to engage or defend from pokes. She'll be stronger against other melee supports, and an even better counter against Rakan now, especially since he was nerfed. Even with the buff though, Leona will still struggle against ranged matchups that can constantly poke or sustain. TAHM KENCH is getting a huge cooldown nerf to his W, which is a big problem in the early game. He needs to peel for his carries, but can't always afford CDR. Now it'll be much easier to exploit TAHM KENCH in lane, force him to use W, then punish the long cooldown window. Enchanter and Mage supports already bullied TAHM KENCH out of lane, and it's not going to get any better for him now that matchups like Thresh are harder to handle. And that's it for the tier list. Feel free to discuss or ask us any questions in the comments below. For more champion stats and guides from Blitz, download our desktop app for League of Legends. We not only tell you the best builds for your champion, who's hot and who's not, but also help you look up teammate stats and enemy playstyles. Totally automatic, no typing required as you go through Champ Select. Intrigued? Check it out at blitz.gg/tierlist.